We're going to have a really dynamic, interactive session now to talk about what gender stereotypes and leadership as women and leadership in general can mean from a panel that's going to be chaired by the chair of the Department of Journalism at DCU. And so it's a great pleasure. I'm going to bring up the panelists now, if I could. Let's start with you, Dr. Bernadette Carr. Dr. Bernadette Carr, ladies and gentlemen, please give her a round of applause. She is a medical director of VHI Healthcare. If you'd come in all the way down, please, we'll go ahead and fill the chairs in from here, one by one. Then next to her, I'd like to bring in Miss Emily Blennon-Hassett. Emily Blennon-Hassett is actually a nurse by trade initially, but now she's gone on and she is the head of commercial for AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals and very influential in her own right. Next to her, I'd like to bring on Niall Saul. Let's work into our diversity commitment here as leaders and talent members. And Niall Saul is the vice president then for AstraZeneca Technologies, if I have said that correctly. And I'm very delighted then to also welcome onto the stage, we have with us, Julie Cinnamon, who is the CEO of Enterprise Ireland, been working in this sector for more than 30 years, and now as the CEO for nearly 3 of those years. Very delighted to have you too, Emily. And then to round off, another representative from DCU, as you heard her speak and welcome us so wonderfully this morning, we have Dr. Ann Sinnott, the head of the Department for Business, the Business Department Dean, the Executive Dean here at DCU, and delighted very much. Please give a round of applause for our 5 panelists who are going to be joining us today. Fantastic, thank you. And then to chair and to engage you and these incredible panelists that have been assembled for you this afternoon, we have Dr. Jane Suter. And Dr. Suter is not only the chair of the J School, as I called it when I went there, the Department of Journalism here at DCU, but she is also the chair, the executive director of what they call FUJO. And that stands for Future Media and Journalism. So really dynamic, and by the way, P.S., she also was the head of the economics editor for the Irish Times. So we've got an illustrious panel here for you. I'll step down. Take it away, Dr. Suter.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think that's really interesting now. So Janine has really put it up to us to try to discuss, her 3 things, why it matters, to whom, and what we're going to do about it. So I was struck by her point that maybe one of the reasons, we don't like talking about it so much is it's boring. We do research on climate change in the media, and that's one of the things. Why isn't it covered? Because it's also boring and it never actually changes. There's nothing new about it. So is that part of it, Anne? What do you think? Why do you think we're here, given all the range of evidence that Janine set out about why it would be of benefit to boardrooms to have equality?
It's an interesting question. I suppose it depends on how you define boring. It's boring because nothing's changed for so long. But why the gender imbalance continues, I suppose, is much, much more difficult to answer. We've got the hard financial evidence. We know that return on investment is higher. We know that profitability is higher in leadership teams or in organisations that have boards that are gender representative. So you would think it would be a clear task to have a gender equal board and employee distribution, but that doesn't happen. We were talking about this at lunchtime, and I think it may have been Janine who said that maybe the emotional appeal is a stronger one than the financial one that I've just mentioned. I'm not so sure about that.
Well, Niall, what do you think? So we saw there, are you Brad Pitt, or should this matter to
I think,
to everybody? What is the appeal?
I think you have to look at this in a kind of a timeline to a certain degree. It's just interesting from one of Janine's slides. In any situation, you've got to look at equalising the supply side. And if you saw the slide that you had, I think we have pretty well equalised the supply side. The issue is that once people get into companies, are companies committed to maintaining that level of equality. And the problem that you face is, and it reminds me of the problem that a lot of us who've been involved in HR and training would have had in the bad old days when you used to have to be going up arguing for investment in training, and people saw it as a cost. And we can remember that an awful lot of time with CEOs and boards, you had a tough time having to put an argument to show them that the economic advantages of investing in training and development for your people, actually produced better economic results. And a lot of us that are in the HR game, that's what we spent a lot of time doing. And the only line you could take with people was, look, if you think the cost of training is expensive, try the cost of ignorance for your organization. And a lot of companies, went and failed because they didn't make that kind of investment. And, really we've just got to take the situation where we've corrected the supply side, far more women are coming through much better qualified than would have been the case in the past. And then we've got to see how best we can treat it as a major change project to try to leverage that into something that looks more like the kind of picture it needs to be. And I think that's the challenge. I would be much more disturbed if I found that the supply side hadn't equalised. But you have to see it in a timeline. And maybe that's a 20-year project over the next 20 years to get even 3/4 of that way. But I remember talking to a guy who was with the Workers' Party years ago and saying to him, how can you go out every Sunday morning and go down with, it was down on Fubbits, I think, or the Irish Worker, and go all around flats in Dublin trying to sell this on a Sunday morning? Why would you not, a very bright guy, why would you not join one of the established parties and you'd be in power within a couple of years? And he said, no, he said, I'm on a much longer journey. And this guy was prepared to do that for 8 or 9 years on a Sunday morning when all the rest of us would have been out playing football. I think it's just a matter of seeing it in a different time frame, because we spent a long time getting to a stage that we've equalised the supply side. Now I think you have the opportunity to do things within organisations and within society to kind of make sure you get the better end product.
Anybody else like to come in there? We're in the long game. 20 years, Emily. Are you happy to wait 20 years to get 75% of the way? What do you think?
I think 20 years seems a little long, to be honest. But I do agree that the supply is, that's reassuring to look at that. But to talk to Janine's point about the labyrinth that women face, I think that really is the challenge for women. There are so many steps along the way where women actually drop out because it's more complex for women to actually succeed because we have, as Janine said, childbirth. There are very other issues. The unconscious bias, I think, is something that resonates for me. And yesterday I thought it was interesting. I was discussing this with a male colleague, a young male colleague, and he asked me when was the session, and I said, oh, it's the last session of the day. And his comment was, oh, it'll be interesting to see who stays behind. There probably will be some women who will stay behind. So I thought this was kind of interesting, and he was young. So I think there's lots of issues that women face, and 20 years. One other point is the youth of today, they don't seem to view gender like we do. And maybe in 50 years they'll look back and say, what were they talking about, 50 years ago? And interestingly, in the last couple of weeks, a very well-known clothing line have introduced their first ungendered clothing line. So this may not be the issue that we think it is 50 years from now. But
yeah, well, that would be that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Bernadette, I'm wondering, as a doctor in the VHI, like one of the things that I suppose Emily spoke to there is women having children, and so maybe having different responsibilities in the home. But yet, if you look at the working life of nurses who are predominantly female, or certainly were in the past, they're doing 12-hour days, they're working weekends, they're having antisocial shift patterns and so on. So that doesn't seem to be what stops it. So, in your view, what's actually going on here?
I think, I think it's a combination of issues. And I was very interested to hear the last speaker, because, having come up through both a medical world and a business world, actually, and hearing it described, I think there are things that one actually isn't aware of going through it, that I think when you hear it described are actually the case. And I was going to agree that I think for younger people, and one of the reasons potentially people regard this as boring is because if we've been talking about this for 40 or 50 years, and everyone thinks the problem is solved, because it's like, of course business isn't like Mad Men anymore, but still, we're still seeing the far difference in terms of the number of figures of women, for example, in the C-suite. So there are other things going on, but if you think the problem is solved, nothing's going to be done about it. And I do think it's actually far broader than a gender issue, because I don't actually think of course there's the subconscious issue around stereotypes and how people view people, but I think it's much broader than women. And I think it is literally, people kind of subconscious stereotypes around, as you said, appearance. Is someone better looking? Does someone look sufficiently masculine enough? Is someone sufficiently feminine enough? So I think this is really important for everybody, and definitely not just women, because of course it's important for women when there are subconscious stereotypes about women, but I think there's a huge issue for men as well. And I think talking about diversity, it is about that, because and it isn't just about having more women in the C-suite, it's having people from different backgrounds. And I know myself, having come in from medicine to an entirely business world, you actually have an entirely different perspective. And it's not one perspective is better than the other, but certainly it allows you to see things from a different point of view, which may mean that ultimately the group is making a much different decision than it would have done if it's all comprised of one sort of type of person, or person of one background. And not to talk about our relatively recent past, but if we think about what happened in Ireland sort of in the last 10 years, and that big issue around whether there was probably substantial groupthink in terms of decision making and an inability to argue from a different perspective, I think it is actually about diversity and different backgrounds, and certainly women are a part of that, but it's much broader.
I'm wondering, Julie, like a lot of the talk today has been about big corporates and how they can change HR practices, and a lot of people here are from HR. Is it? And it's obviously more difficult to change culture in a huge organisation. So, are you finding it different in the SMEs that you work with in Enterprise Ireland, or with the entrepreneurs? Do you see, what we were talking about there, like possibly that it's different among younger people, or where would your perspective be?
One of the areas that we are involved in specifically is startups. And if you go back every year up until about 2011, we would be supporting roughly 100 startups a year. And out of those, there were 7 women in the teams. And there's roughly 2 to 3 people in a startup. So that's 250 entrepreneurs, 7 women on average every year. There's been a lot of work done in Enterprise Ireland looking at what the issues were, because the talent is there, so what's stopping it? And ambition, confidence, lack of role models is something which women are more impacted by than males, and the fact that there are less role models exacerbates the problem. Lack of networks. We all complain about men playing golf. Actually, networks are really important. So what we have done is worked on each of those issues, and in 2015, we had 30% of our startups were female. So the global figure for female technology startups is 8%, so it's not just an Irish problem. So, I mean, on a positive note, I certainly think that there are things which, when you look at the root causes, but you can't overestimate the issue of confidence and ambition. And in terms of, looking at projects coming in from males versus females, women, and going back to the issue that Janine was talking about in terms of going for an interview, the same thing happens with regard to a startup project. A woman will set a level of ambition which she believes she will exceed. A man will set an ambitious level of target. The man will reach a higher level of, typically because they have set a higher level of ambition. And that lack of ambition in women is holding them back, or lack of confidence really in terms of, wanting to achieve and not, I think that dealing with failure is a bigger issue in my view with females than males, and therefore they set something which they're confident that they will achieve.
I think that's really interesting, so I'd like to bring in anybody who wants to contribute to that. So where does that come from? Is it the kind of the gender stereotypes that we have that Janine was talking about? Is it the kind of the gendered marketing that some people's companies will be engaging in? Is it our liking for single-sex education, where people aren't bringing that up? What are the possible things that are leading to this? So if we wanted our 15-year-old girls to be feeling more as confident as their 15-year-old brothers, what should we be doing if that's where we're going to in the future? Anybody have any thoughts?
Well, having my youngest child being almost 15, a girl as well, I can say. I mean, they're obviously very confident. I honestly think it's not about, people are different. Boys and girls are clearly different. Boys are clearly, and I think the literature will also show, boys are far more likely to be risk takers. I mean, they jump off the top of the sideboard, and the girls don't do it. And I don't know whether it's more about, I don't think you want the girls to be like that, but what you want the girls to be, I think, is confident in their own abilities, because the girls are going to be more cautious. A lot of girls. I mean, I'm sort of grouping them, and that has huge advantages. And I think it comes down to the end of it, which you actually need, and I know from business, what you need is a combination on a team. So you need the risk taker and you need the cautious person. So it's not that you want the girls to be the same as the boys, but I think we want a business environment which values the qualities of all. And certainly, I guess we all know that, I mean, you have the role of the leader who is possibly, bringing everybody else along, but for any leadership concept to work, there has to be the team around it. And I know absolutely on that team, you need a combination of skills. So the skills of the girls, the attributes of the girls, the somewhat, they're sort of more cautious. You absolutely need that just as much as you need the guy who's going to leap off the table into the
But I think
whatever.
You're right there, Berta, because if you look at it, in any top team, you need the balance of skills. You need some people to be the kind of go-getters. You need some people to be the people who are questioning it. I mean, I think if we'd had a higher level of women leaders at the top of various organisations in almost any country, you would probably find there would be much less groupthink and much less people trying to, as males tend to do, kind of outdo each other in terms of their bets. And
So
almost ignoring risk, and you just have to look at it in that context. It's more about balancing the skills than giving predominance to one particular set of skills.
But then we saw just what Janine was saying. Then, if women are doing that and they're there, then they're finding it difficult if they are put into that category that they are meant to be the non-risk takers and the people who are there to balance and the people who are there to be cautious and all it. So
Not all women.
Yeah, but it's not everyone is a non-risk taker.
Yeah, I don't think we can generalise. I mean, I think it's important, as you said, to have balance, because we know with homogenised groups, they don't know what they don't know because they think the same, they act the same, and that's the challenge. And diversity, I think it's more about diversity as opposed to the gender balance. But again, are we feeding into the stereotype by talking about women not being the risk takers? Because of course there are women who are risk takers. We know that neuroscience shows that when men and women's brains are wired differently, but you can't say that every woman is a bad map reader or every man is a good map reader. It just doesn't work like that. So I think it's about diversity generally in an organisation, and we know from research that diverse groups are good for business.
And is it that maybe we're all like to think in binaries, so we like to think people are either risk takers or not? And in fact, the world is
I
much
think
more
that's
fluid than
exactly
that, and we're not necessarily all in
People are on
binary
different
groups.
points in the spectrum.
Yeah.
Not everybody is up
Exactly.
the top end just because they happen to be male, or down the bottom end because they happen to be women, or the reverse.
The world is grey. I mean, that's the reality, and we all have some male and female characteristics, and at times we exhibit more one or the other depending on the need. But I think that's exactly the problem. We tend to view women in one way and men another way. And that's where the challenges arise, I think, in business.
And then one of the issues is, I mean, if you go back to the question about this being boring, at the end of the day, I think for a long time there wasn't a lot of discussion on this topic, and I think today, between 30% clubs and the whole focus, the war for talent that people are saying, so it's probably never a better time in terms of people saying we have to hold on to the talent that we have. And the realities are at different times in a woman's career in particular, because of family commitments, etc., they're at risk of deciding, you know, will I hang in there or will I not? And I think there's a real need to have somebody there to support women who are coming back from maternity leave, and and if you look at the economics at times with childcare, people can decide, is this worth it? And have somebody who has actually got through that phase and realizes, you know, life gets easier, and you know that. So at different times you need support. And I think that organisations are probably more tuned into that today than they have been in the past, when women may have decided to step back when they didn't really get the support they needed.
So does this speak a bit to the point where I think Janine mentioned in September or October we're going to have 2 weeks paternity leave, but yet we have Mark Zuckerberg taking 2 months paternity leave. So, you know, if we did move to that kind of model where men were, you know, are companies somehow, are they less likely to want women because they might go off for a whole year, maybe even 3 whole years if they have
I think
3 children? Is this an unspoken thing, or, you know?
I think that within organisations, again, it's about diversity as opposed to gender, that, you know, the culture of the organisation really has to believe in diversity. And that if that means giving men paternity leave, well, that's part of the deal, because if you believe in diversity, that's what you actually push forward. That would be
And
for
does
me.
it, like, what would your company, for example, do around this?
Diversity would be important in the organisation. Currently, 40% of the senior leadership is female, and that's reflected in the Irish marketing company also. And there is a greater push toward diversity generally, as opposed to just gender balance. So there are various programs in place, and I think as a woman, I have to actually believe that my organisation actually believes in diversity and believes in gender balance. And, you know, we've all heard the rhetoric and we've all heard about vision, mission. And I know this morning there was a great talk about really living that in an organisation. And I think the challenge for women and diversity generally is that sometimes we don't believe the mission. You know, you have to actually see it happening, and you have to see women being given the leadership positions in order for you to believe that there is an opportunity there. And also to Julie's point about, again, supporting women at certain times in their career. You know, there needs to be certain, I guess, things in the system that support women.
I think it's also important that organisations are increasingly aware of the existence of the stereotypes we've heard of so much today. So training for both unconscious and conscious bias, that's really important.
Yeah.
You can even see it from our discussion.
Yeah, and how would you, so talk to me a bit about the difference between that unconscious and conscious bias?
Well, I guess we'd all have very different ideas on what's... Jane and I were at unconscious bias training yesterday, so it's very fresh in our minds. But we were very much of the view that some of what's described as unconscious is actually very conscious bias. So I imagine you'd have a lot of diversity on that question around the audience.
But irrespective of the gender issue, as you say, it's about diversity, because the bias problem exists right across the story. And I mean, from some of the programs that I've done some work with Enterprise Ireland's Leadership for Growth in Stanford, and one of the big topics that's emerging is the whole understanding and management of bias. Because the biases that were pointed out this morning, they exist whether you're, and males and females, it doesn't really matter, it exists in organisations. And you need to find some way of making people aware of them, and how, you need to check, are you free of those biases when you're making a decision? And diversity helps you to do that, because people are looking at it through a different lens and will kind of deconstruct your
and
bias.
is it that you can actually be free of bias, or is it just that you can be aware of bias and then try to mitigate against it?
Well, the first thing is you need to understand there's the possibility of the bias and try to identify what it is, and then you decide whether you need to eliminate it or just mitigate or manage around it. It's like risk.
And so any ideas, anybody? How do we, like, anything that you would think?
I think that one in particular, because I think that's absolutely fundamental. And because, again, having seen an organisation, healthcare is essentially unidimensional in terms of course, there are different sort of groups within it, but it's absolutely unidimensional in terms of the sort of people you meet. They're all the same, we're all the same, or you're all the same. Business is fundamentally different, particularly being a doctor in a business environment. I mean, because in business then you've a much different, you've an entirely heterogeneous group. So so in VHI, you've got doctors, you've got some nurses, but far and away the majority are, you've got business people, you've got financial people, you've got legal people, you've got HR people. And there's no question whether it's conscious or unconscious, everybody in those groupings are all completely different. And but that's where I think value comes from, that diversity. But for there to be value in that, you have to recognize the positive attributes that other groups have, that your group doesn't have, and therefore that you don't have. And honestly, I think you can kind of expect people to be inspired or to, but far easier to actually make it, part of training, which is training in terms of things like bias, in terms of things like group attributes, in terms of things like constructing a team. Because inevitably, I think if we're all coming out we're all going to be influenced by the discipline we've come from. And if unless we've trained in a broad sort of business training environment, we're definitely going to be very much focused from the discipline we've come from. And you're almost not going to be aware you have the biases or that people from another discipline are actually entirely different until it's made apparent to you. And I think that sort of training, I think for young people coming into an organization would be extremely valuable. Because certainly, for me, I've sort of observed it over time and having seen all the different groupings one comes in contact with, I think you might as well, I think it would be far easier to just short circuit all of that, and young people coming into an organization, particularly as diverse, you just give them specific training and you talk about those issues. And then I think you're right, I don't think you can eliminate bias, but I think you can at least make people aware, I'm thinking like this, and this is what this is leading me to conclude, and is this correct or not? And then, so their judgment will be less clouded by an unconscious bias.
Yeah, so they can actually ask, well, actually, is this just my unconscious bias, or is it in the interest of my organization or my company or my startup or whatever?
One of the questions that you can look at, I don't know how many years exactly we are from the marriage bar in the public service, but I remember I worked in, actually it was Holles Street Hospital back in the early 70s.
My mother had it, yeah.
And it was at the time of the marriage bar. And when you looked at it, I was looking through a HR lens, that the leadership in the profession, the nursing profession, was drawn from one cohort of people. They were women who had not got married. And women who had got married had been treated as second-class citizens, and that had to change before you could get that kind of different set of perspectives in terms of how to manage that profession.
Now that changed because of European Union legislation. Like a lot of what's changed in Ireland has actually changed because of pressure from Europe or changes in European regulation or legislation. So when we look at that then, and we look at the top of the table that Janine had, and you had of course the Scandis leading, they always do, and all these things. But they had gender quotas. So it's actually in legislation. We saw it in the recent election. There were the quotas for candidates running. Now, most people, when you say gender quotas, go, oh my God, no, you know what I mean? Because I don't want to be that token woman, or I don't want to be that quota, or I don't want, But is that something we have to look at, or is this something that you think that we can all work on kind of culturally?
I personally think there's a focus now on, for example, if you take the issue of females on boards, and I support the approach being done by the 30% Club, which is putting a spotlight on it and appealing to the chairs of the boards, which are largely male, and getting them involved. I think if you don't get male decision makers who are in those positions to see the logic and to do it, I would favour continuing to put a spotlight on it and try to work at that, as opposed to going for the nuclear option, which to me is quotas. I think there's a lot of it will take a bit of time, but I think there's progress in the area, and I would personally favour trying to keep a spotlight on it as opposed to...
Okay, so we're second from bottom at the moment. Portugal's below us then, so hopefully we can be fourth or fifth from bottom in 5 years' time or something.
And I think if the approach of the 30% Club and so on works reasonably quickly, that's great. Because if it doesn't work quickly, nobody's going to ask us, do we want quotas? They'll be imposed.
Yeah. Would anybody here actually be in favour of them?
No, I think fundamentally I don't like the idea of quotas, but you know, judging from the result of this election, I think that, you know, it's almost inevitable that we have to go down that route.
Yeah, if change
Yeah.
is
I think you
Yeah,
have to go,
change is slow.
If you go back to the approach in the 30%, where they will encourage the chairs to force recruitment people to give them 50% of the candidates options. So then they make a decision. So it's actually trying to encourage people to go a little bit stronger. It's a little bit like us with competitive funds. The same fund that we now have for females only is exactly the same as for male and female, but women weren't applying for it. And it was back to the confidence issue. And when you actually did a female-only fund, we were inundated with applications. We approved some, and the females who didn't get support, we said, apply to the general fund, and then to go to other females and say, the people who failed in the female fund got funding in the general fund. So, you know, I think in a way there is something about the confidence piece, but you actually have to force the system as well, as in people to give a panel of applicants for jobs, for board positions, which is mixed.
So it could be this last question, then I want to open it up here. Could it be that we say the supply side is fixed, and that's true for 20-somethings coming out of university, but in fact the supply side for the more senior positions isn't fixed, and maybe that's something that needs to be looked at.
But I think that's where organisations have to, you know, if they're serious about the issue, and you're right, the supply side at that age bracket end is sorted, but there is nothing stopping organisations, if they want to really work on it, to actually remove some of the barriers and give greater access to people, you know, who may have missed out on that opportunity. And that's about straightening out that line that Janine had to actually establish a kind of more equitable situation.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Great, I'm standing by.
Yeah, so we just have a look.
Fire up a question. Dive in. Anyone? Any ways in your organizations that you're seeing? Yes, we have one. Pardon me. Stand up, please. Please address.
Thank you for your speech. And I'm Jane, a PhD student in DCU. And my question comes from my research topic. And my first question is, since you say network is important to navigate women's career mobility, so objectively speaking, finding mentor or coacher is critical important here. So what kind of benefits you've ever received actually? And do you think you experience pitfalls or some risks when you sometimes that take up your time and drain your energy, and even you feel obligation to do something payback? So if the answer is yes, so what that be and where does that come from? Thank you for taking my question.
I think that's about giving back. So the importance of giving back. Anybody like to
And also the question of networks and mentoring was one of the points, I think. And certainly there's I think for a lot of the women's networks now, for example, have mentoring specifically for women across organisation, and I certainly believe that mentoring is really important, be it within an organisation or outside, and not just for women but for men, and actually having mentors that can, you know, provide support to people. So I think that's something which is really important. Certainly in the giving things back, I think increasingly, you know, for example, we have things like Going for Growth, where it's female entrepreneurs who are successful supporting earlier stage entrepreneurs. And I think that giving back is something which I would see more of today in both at middle and senior management, people mentoring across organisations, but also entrepreneurs supporting each other. So there's quite a bit of giving
And
back.
should it be that women are mentored by women
No.
and men by men, or women by men and men by women, or how?
All of that.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's one more question.
It should be a man. There were 3 guys who were able to ask Joe
Here we
Schmidt
go, good.
questions.
Thanks, Jane.
Hi, my name is William. Just in terms of governance, you're talking about boards there. Do you think men should play a stronger role in for example, if I was invited onto a board, I would first ask the first question, what's diversity, what's the gender balance, before I accept. What do you think of that?
I think that sounds great. You know, I would assume that people might ask that before they join a board, but I think that, you know, if you could champion that, because really it is about the men buying into this. You know, it's about everybody working together in order to achieve this, because this is not a woman's fight. This is everybody's fight, you know, in order for diversity. So, you know, yeah, well done.
Yeah. Maybe it's like that all-male panels, is it, that you're meant to ask, and if you're on an all-male panel, you say, no thanks.
But I think addressing the issue with the investment community, because if ever there was a part of society that actually looks purely at the economic value of doing something, if you can convince them of that, I think you would find some pressure from them to get better balance.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap up in a minute, but just a last word from anybody, kind of your final thought about what we should do or where we should go.
Well, I think that we should determine not to be here in 20 years' time having this conversation. I know when I left school, I assumed that I wouldn't be the age I am now and be facing this conversation. At that stage, you know, the gender discrimination had come in, equal pay had come in, the marriage bar had been lifted. And I thought nothing could stop me or stop women. And I think it's depressing to look at the figures that we have at the moment. And it's great to see the energy in the room and the commitment to changing it. But, you know, we really need to see change, and reasonably quickly.
Well, I certainly wouldn't disagree. The only thing that I would say on a positive note relative to any of the last 30 years that I've worked in business in Ireland is there's more focus on it. And driven by the business need. It isn't just be nice to women, it's actually be nice to the economy, and it's actually for the benefit of the country that I would say there isn't really another option. We have to do it, but there is a focus on it now which hasn't been there in the last 25 years.
I think the timeline and social history and economic history would say that 20 years is probably a bit optimistic, but I think what you need to do is get a relatively small number of people who are in strong enough positions who can actually get practices going in particular organisations that they can use as exemplars, that will waken people up to the possibility that people within organisations actually talking about it rather than in fact, most of the stuff you hear comes from academics, whereas the people actually who are in business should be out saying, this has worked for us because of this. I think that's a more powerful tool for change than just engaging in kind of bland conversations.
My experience is that diversity works. It absolutely works. And for the women in the room, I would say get a mentor. It's really important. And for the men, I would say support the women and support the diversity.
Final word?
I'm actually far more optimistic. I mean, I think the changes in terms of the supply side, you know, girls, like we all know the story of girls and how they do in the Leaving Cert, has happened really fast. I think the change is just inevitable and I think it's all going to be basic around education, how well informed young people are when they come out. It's just not going to be an issue. People are aware of issues like bias anymore. So I don't think this will be the issue in 20 years.
I wish I were wrong, but I don't think. I think I may not be.
Well, that's a nice optimistic note to end on. So thank you very much to all our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for our Women Leaders panel. Thank you very much, Dr. Jane Suter, for chairing that so wonderfully and so provocatively.